What does it mean to strengthen your presence, to pay attention and notice how what you think you're hiding, I got this under control, is just leaking out in so many ways. People know that you're stressed. People feel your anxiety. People know when you're serving yourself and not the group, when ego gets in the way. In this episode, we are covering the connection between plumbers and change leaders, the importance of presence in leadership, understanding expectations and trust. We'll share a framework for effective conversations, the risks for not being present, recognizing the line above and below. We'll share practical strategies for leaders, creating space for reflection, the power of awareness and choice, key takeaways, and this episode's community engagement question. Good morning, good people. My name is Frederick Jefferson III, and I am here with my co-host, John Rodríguez, a deep thinker and practitioner of change and transformation. One of the things that's important is that you hear from both of us as quickly as possible so we can dive deep into the topic today. So, in that vein, John, how are you today?
I'm better now hearing your voice, talking with you. Always lifts me up a little bit. Today's a good day. I'm looking forward to this conversation. As always, an intriguing and interesting conversation and topic. The week has been full of different kind of moments, so I'm going to be borrowing from this week's experiences and just glad to be here again, trying to contribute to the calm in all chaos.
Awesome. So, speaking of calm, today we're going to be taking a deep dive in a topic that we call your presence is the practice. And here's the kicker. The second part of that topic is what plumbers and change leaders have in common. That's a little weird, right, John?
What? No wonder plumbers.
What plumbers?
Podcast about social change.
Right? So what indeed do plumbers and change leaders have in common? Well, I think it starts with, both change leaders and plumbers. They focus on a number of things that are important, right? They focus on this idea of continuous improvement and continuous learning. Both change leaders and plumbers focus on attention to detail. And the good ones, the really good ones, they show up with integrity and a dedication to master their chosen field, right? Like a plumber perfects their skill in plumbing, a leader develops their craft through practice, through reflection, by shaping the culture, modeling the way, guiding others with precision for what? To gain lasting results. And ultimately, hopefully, they'll end up with a powerful legacy where followers say, wow, hey, John, that John guy, he was the best leader I've ever had the privilege to follow and work with. Right? So what is it that these plumbers do specifically? What is it that leaders do specifically to have a powerful legacy and a powerful way of engaging with people? John, before we go deeper, I think it'd be great for me to share a story with you about an experience, a real experience with a plumber that I had last year.
Oh, let's
I know
hear
that,
that one. Let's hear that
and I know that you had some recent issues at home as well. Well, so last year, we're getting ready to have guests over, and in our downstairs bathroom, I go to reach and I turn on the faucet, and it's just nothing but this little trickle of water coming out. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, this is not the time. I'm going to have to spend all this money on a new faucet because I know it's not the pressure and anywhere else. Everything else in the house is working except for the downstairs guest bathroom. So I call up the guy, I get a recommendation from a good friend of mine, and I call up the plumber. This guy shows up. All right, I open the door. First thing out of his mouth is, Mr. Jefferson, I understand that you have a problem. Oh, yeah, well, yes. yes, I do.
That's why I called.
He's like, but before I enter your home, let me put on these little booties to cover my shoes so I don't make any tracks into your beautiful home. So he made a reference to my house. He saw that I was in need of help and was very respectful. So we go into the bathroom. I pull the handle and he goes, yep, you got a problem here. And it goes, it could be one of two things. It could be a little $4 problem, or it could be a multi-$100 problem. And we're going to find out. And I'm like, I'm crossing my fingers. Please make it a $4 problem. And this guy, he's not even carrying his toolkit with him, right? He just reaches into his pocket and pulls out this little plastic tool and he goes, I'm hoping it's this. And he reaches under the faucet. And I didn't even know that you could actually take out the screen. And he takes this little locking mechanism, opens up the screen, and goes and pulls out this little, what looks like a ball bearing set. And it's this little black device, and he cleans it off. And he goes, I'm thinking that it's this problem. Cleans it, puts it back, turns the handle, and voila, the water comes rushing out like there was no problem. And he's like, yeah, these faucets have this little thing that limits the amount of water that can go through, and sometimes they get clogged. And that was your problem. And he didn't charge me. He's like, this is 3 minutes of my time. I had a feeling that that was what the problem was when Arda talked to me about your problem. I kind of figured that that's what was happening, and I see a lot of it. But I tell the story, John, because this guy showed up and built trust right away. He showed up with integrity. He did some really powerful things, which for me were about paying attention to detail. He was professional, and now that's my guy. I won't call anybody else for anything because I trust him. I know that he's going to tell me the truth and give me what needs to happen, right?
Absolutely.
Could you imagine someone else coming in, right, doing the exact opposite, which would be something like, I hear you got a problem. I'm going to walk into your house without putting the booties on, right? I'm going to say, you know what? Yep, you got a problem. I see it, but I just don't feel like plumbing today, right? I got plumber's block. I'm just not feeling it. What do you think my response to that guy would be?
Oh, a lot of disappointment.
A lot of disappointment. I would never call him back. I probably would write something up in Better Business Bureau, right? All those things would have happened, right? And here's the difference. You had these two plumbers show up to a job, but have a vastly different impact on the situation and on me and ultimately on themselves, right? And so that's why I just wanted to bring into our thinking the how is that those actions related to a change leader, right? So when I just revealed that story to you, John, what was coming up for you?
Expectations. Expectations that we have when we're working on something, when we have a problem, when we're working on something together. People out in the field doing the work on the front lines, what they expect of each other, of leaders, of supporters, of funders, of their facilitators. How are they showing up? Are they showing up in a way that brings that level of confidence and trust that you described? Or are they showing up in a way that engenders confusion, mistrust? The problem, we don't even seem anywhere near solving it or addressing it because there's just a lot of missed signals and distractions. And this can play out in a lot of different ways. We're obviously having a lot of fun with the plumber metaphor, and we're going to continue that for this conversation this time because do you really want to deal with a plumber that doesn't plumb? I don't think so. You have a problem. So, what's it like for the folks you're working with on your change initiative, right? When you show up. So, that's what I'm thinking. And I'm also thinking, when have I been that person?
Hmm.
And I'm also thinking, do I notice when someone else is that person? What do I do about that? Can I also show grace when someone is showing up in that way? Can I provide feedback? Can I say, it would be helpful when you enter my house if you put on some booties? I'd really like that, right? Let's assume it's a new plumber with not a lot of experience, and they need that kind of feedback in the immediate sense. So there are a lot of ways we can take this. So it's bringing up a lot of things for me around what is my role when I'm part of the group and I'm being led. I'm the person with the problem that needs the plumber. What is it like when I'm the plumber?
Well, yeah, John, thank you for bringing those concepts. One of the things that I wanted to remind us of is the how we enter into the conversation with one another and the framework in which we break down and engage with ideas, right?
Mhm.
One of our practices is to follow a framework, and it's very simple, right? We start with the what. We then enter into the so what, right? For us, right, John?
Mhm.
The so what is why are we talking about this thing and why is it important? And then the third step is what can we do about it, right? The now what, right? So this beautiful little framework of so what, now what is something that I've been using, and I think that you've been using for many years now. But it is a powerful way to engage the conversation. So the what that we've been talking about, right? The what is how your presence is the practice, right? The what is what do plumbers and change leaders have in common? And where we're going to go next is getting into the so what. Why does this matter? And and John, I think it'd be great for you to take on this next phase of our conversation to discover why does this matter?
All right. This idea, like, so what? So by so what we mean, why does this matter to your work, to the people you're working with, to you, to the people around you, to the movement, to the people you are impacting and want to impact? Whether you're working on housing, education, healthcare, poverty issues, any other issue, there's a reason that this matters. There's a reason that you're doing this. And this way in which you show up directly relates to that. In the plumber's metaphor, it's that you have a plumbing problem, a leak or something going on that doesn't work. You're clear what the problem is. And if the plumber doesn't show up fully present, enabled in their craft, able to practice their craft, you're going to have a problem. And Fred gave us quite a few examples of what that means when you're actually interacting. The same thing is happening in the real time of change work. I don't have to tell this audience that, Fred. They know they're doing this now. They're in the thick of it every day. There's a challenge multiple times a day. So I'm challenged to show up fully. And that means my presence will multiply toward the good or toward the bad, toward building equity or toward diminishing equity. I will either be making good deposits or I'll be making withdrawals of energy and momentum. All of these things impact the group's capacity to keep going forward. So the leaders and the facilitators doing this work, what does it take for you to really be thinking about? What is it about what you're doing or not doing that is putting your initiative at risk? That's the reason that you want to be clear about this. The other part of that in terms of the craft is that my presence is my craft in the way that a plumber or any kind of crafts person brings their skill to the table. So when I'm not able to show up fully and not be present in a way that's useful, I'm putting the initiative at risk again. I'm putting a moment, a decision at risk. I'm delaying something. I'm causing our efforts to even reverse in some cases, where you make the kind of mistakes or you interact in a way where you have to start regressing and apologizing and a lot of extra work to make up for things that if had you been in the moment, you may not have run into that. Think of again the plumbing metaphor, a plumber that shows up and makes a lot of mistakes. Now those things have to be addressed differently. Or in their interactions with their customers, they don't make good decisions and the plumber has to return to redo something or correct something because they haven't had a quality interaction. The other thing is we talked about this in other episodes and we'll continue to bring this up, but the behavior that I have, where am I operating? I'm operating above or below the line of consistent good functioning. I'm showing up in a way that is useful or not useful. And again, that awareness contributes to building momentum or reducing momentum. That's what we're talking about when we say, what's at risk? So what? So why does this matter? We cannot tell you what matters to you. There's no way. What we can do is help remind folks. And again, through dialogue, conversation, your comments around what you're hearing here today, the community we build, what you're sharing with each other, is what happens when you put the initiative at risk? What's at stake for you? Are you clear about that? Any thoughts on this piece here, Fred?
What I liked about what you just laid out is that you really defined the why this is important and the what's at risk, right? And one of the things that you laid out too was this concept of the line. I was wondering what did you mean by the line?
The line is that place where you start to notice that you're either not helping the group accomplish its goals through your behavior, through the way you're showing up. You're creating a barrier, you're derailing, you're blaming, you're scapegoating, you're frustrated, and you don't know why. It may be you, maybe something else, your behavior, but something is amiss, something's wrong, and you know it. That's when you're below the line. When you're above the line, you're aware, you're functioning, you're doing well, you're in a state and you're operating in a way that is inspiring people, it's motivating people because you're motivated and you're feeling inspired. And that's not to say that you're always going to be motivated and inspired every single time you meet with your group. It's to say that you're aware of how your behavior is impacting the group, how your presence is impacting the group. When you practice your craft, and we're going to talk more about this in the third part of this conversation, but when you're practicing your craft and you're in good shape to practice your craft, you can overcome those temporary challenges. Sometimes it's just a matter of staying in practice, like a good athlete, a good musician, a good artist, a good dancer. One of the groups that I was doing work with during pre-COVID, one of the things they used to talk about often, it's risky to put our facilitators out there if they haven't been facilitating the model consistently and regularly because they lose their edge, they lose that flow. That's where you sort of lose your capacity to be in the moment because you're kind of wondering and thinking about the models or the tools. You're belaboring all the processes, and this happens in change work all the time. Someone goes to a conference, reads a new book, and all of a sudden we're changing models, we're changing scope, we're changing tools without becoming proficient at the tools we already have or understanding why we're using them. So there could be any number of things that are causing us to put the initiative at risk. And those are just some of the things. So that's kind of the way that think about it and see it, Fred.
What it reminds me of, John, is some of the work that came from Jim Dethmer, Diane Chapman, and Kaylee Clem back in 2014. They wrote a book. It was called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And they came up with the exact framework that you're talking about, this line. And the way that they framed it is they said that we have a choice between an open, accountable mindset and a blame-oriented mindset. Right. And so this idea of being open and curious and accountable is what it means to be above the line. But if you're closed, defensive, and blame oriented, you tend to be below the line. And so they started to describe some of the behaviors and the thinking processes that happen when we're either above or below the line. And one of the things that you said earlier that's really important in what these authors would agree with you on is the fact that we can't always be above the line. Why? Because we're human beings.
Yes.
And we have limited storage capacity for energy. And when our energy is low, we tend to go below the line. And the key here as leaders is as you and I know, the first step in any change initiative is awareness, right? If you want to choose to be above the line, you have to be aware that you're below the line. And what are the red flags that you should be paying attention to when you're in either one of these states, right? And how do you give yourself agency to continue to make the choice that you know will have a positive impact on the group versus a negative impact on the group? We have to make those choices all the time. But first we've got to recognize, where am I coming from? Am I below the line or am I above the line? And I think that examination is a powerful model, powerful framework that can start to move us into the conversation about the now what? What can I do specifically to enter into a place of conscious leadership where I'm actually giving this change initiative a winning chance, right? Because we know change is hard and it's never guaranteed. And leaders have an important duty to choosing the outcome, right? Stuff happens.
Yes.
How you react to the stuff. That's important.
That's the part you can control, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And we're going to get into that right now.
So why does this matter?
Mm-hmm.
We're getting ready to go into one of my favorite parts of any conversation is the pragmatics of how do you get stuff done. What can we do? Especially about this idea of recognizing that there's a line, all right? Recognizing that how we communicate and behave is so much of a choice that we can either be open and curious and accountable, or we can communicate and act in a way that's closed and defensive and is blame oriented, right? So if we can start to recognize that there's a line, we can do two of my favorite statements. We can name it to tame it, and we can see it to be it. But first things first, you got to recognize that there is a line, and we go above and below all the time. But the problem is that we don't recognize when we're above the line, nor do we recognize when we're below the line. And our default, our brain, because we want to think and believe that we're just great people. We like to believe that we are always above the line, even when we're not. And I can tell you, I can raise my hand, say guilty as charged. I don't know about you, John.
Absolutely.
I've I've pretended to be above the line when I'm way below. So let me share another story about being below the line and utilizing the framework that we talked about, this framework above the line, below the line thinking, as a tool to free my mind and to free the group's mind from being stuck in this cycle of blame, shame, and judgment. I was facilitating a at the State Department, and we were in a powerful conversation that got derailed by one of the participants who accused me of withholding information, basically saying, you know, but you're just not telling us the truth.
Ooh.
And I was like, oh, wow. And so immediately the heat rose through my brain. The fear rose in my belly. And I was like, oh, crap. But that's not the word that I used.
Yeah, I got you.
I'm not sure what to do in this moment. And then I caught myself thinking, I'm like, in my mind, who's this jerk? Again, I didn't use that word either. And I found myself getting emotionally hijacked. And I did not have a co-facilitator at that time. So I called a timeout. I said, I think what's important is that we take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to have a conversation about what's happening here right now. And what I did, John, is I got out chart paper and I quickly put a line on that chart, and I put all the behaviors, mine included, and thinking below the line. And then I put the positive aspects above the line. And when people came into the room, I asked one powerful question. I said, are we above the line, or are we below the line at this moment in time? And the silence was beautiful, because I saw in people's mind, they're like, oh crap, we as a collective are below the line. And then I asked another powerful question. I said, what do we need to do to move ourselves above the line? So what did I use in that moment? The name it to tame it. and
Name it to tame it.
And to see it to be it. Once people started to see where they were able to take action into, this is where I want to be, but I'm not there now, right? By acknowledging, yes, we're tired. Yes, it's at the end of the day. And yes, we are stuck in this blame, shame spiral that's not productive, that's not moving us into anywhere. So what can we do to change ourselves? And we did. We were able to move into a place where we started strategizing about ways to be different, to show up different, to show up as the leaders that we were in that room. We weren't operating as leaders in a powerful sense where we're taking control of the situation, which is taking control of one's emotions, being emotionally intelligent and understanding that our energies were impacting our behavior, which was impacting the system. And then we made a different choice collectively. And it was such a powerful understanding and knowing. And one of the practices that you and I have talked about is the power of journaling. And so many of them the next day said, I journaled on this, I dreamt about this. I'm going to utilize this tool. It's a very simple tool, easy to set up, easy to think about, because there's nothing right or wrong about what you put in either one of these settings, right? What all your powerful thinking goes above the line. Your negative thinking goes below the line. It's just about recognizing sometimes I operate from here and I might want to call a timeout. I might want to take a different step, ask a different question that I can pull from the above the line thinking rather than getting stuck and below the line. So that's my first foray in the story. And what you can do right away is know where you are in connection to the line that we're talking about. Are you above? Are you below? And what do you want to do about it? So what does that bring up for you, John?
Well, there's just again these dialogues are always so rich because there's so much there. There's the container you're in. You expanded the container. You took a break. There's the journaling. There's the breathing. There's asking the right question, exploring questions. Well, how are we doing collectively right now? All of these things can happen in real time. So there are ways, they're very clear ways of people to take control of a situation. Now, what happens? I'm wondering what triggers these things to me so consistently when a group of people who are share a cause, uh, I'll call them right minded for the moment, and say they're trying to do something useful in the world, something to benefit their community, others, folks in need. Why so often do we see these groups struggling in terms of what they can do? Why do they derail? Why do they sabotage? Why do they scapegoat? Why do they finger point? Why do they dissolve? When these groups dissolve, they don't dissolve with clarity. There's no clear closure. People just stop and dissipate. No one ever asks, what happened? Right? So that pain, that feeling, this is about trying to get ahead of it. And one of the things that comes to mind as you share is that creating expanse, creating space. So often a meeting is we got an hour, we got 2 hours, we got this. You invite people, you invite 50 people to a 3, 4 hour meeting. That's nowhere near enough time. There are 50 people in the room
Right.
that need to be heard and have an experience. So a 4 hour meeting means little unless you think through how are we going to create this and do this in such a way that it remains expansive, which is what you did when you took the time out. So when you're especially these days on Zoom calls and people are rushing in and out of meetings and they have an hour, maybe an hour and a half to take on a piece of some monumental issue that they've been working on for years, I think we set ourselves up for stress and failure in these environments so that we're not successful because we're not creating the expanse. So to think about that expanse ahead of time and say, we're going to create the room, we're going to design this in a way, we're going to be thoughtful, we're going to prepare. So when groups say to me and leaders that I work with say, well, I don't have time to prepare, that is highly suspect behavior to me. That is something that makes me wonder, are they aware of what it takes to do this kind of heavy lifting and work in the world? If you don't have time to prepare, you should be thinking about how you put yourself and the group at risk when that happens. Same thing with people who can't show up on time. Same thing with people who can't review content ahead of time. That's not to say that everyone has to be exactly on time. Every single person all the time has to review everything. That's unrealistic. But it says that most of the time, especially the people who are driving and who are carrying the load in the moment, those folks are invested in such a way they can show more fully, which is, I think, what happened in what you described, because you created a moment of reflection, of expansion. And so I want to really be sincere and thoughtful in these dialogues with our listeners, in that we're going to tell you the truth. That way, at least we've experienced it and see it. And that means that if you want to solve this, you want to know what's next. What's next is that you're thoughtful in your planning and thinking so you can get ahead of these issues so that your presence is more enabled. However, you take care of your presence. And we'll continue to talk about many ways you can prepare yourself and take care of your presence and being more self aware. But the basics matter.
Yeah, that's right. I think the bottom line is, you got to first understand that there's a line, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just talked about what does it mean to strengthen your presence, to pay attention and notice how what you think you're hiding, I got this under control, is just leaking out in so many ways. People know that you're stressed. People feel your anxiety. People know when you're serving yourself and not the group, when ego gets in the way. And you just helped us break down what happened to me and what I was able to do. I wasn't aware. I wasn't trying. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create expanse. I'm going to change people's minds. I was just grasping at straws, but I know now, in retrospect, thinking back and being in this conversation with you, oh, it was slowing down. It was pausing and breathing and grounding myself before I got back into a leadership position with this group. And ultimately, what I was doing was indeed thinking like a plumber, right? How do I fix the flow, the energy flow? How do I keep the system moving? And it's by slowing down, looking for the opportunity to fix and to utilize my experience, my know-how, my expertise to keep the system alive and powerful. So thank you for clarifying my own thinking around what I took for granted in that moment and didn't take time to reflect back on that. I think that's another key aspect to what you can do is to do things like this, which is really an after action um, breakdown and report. What did you do well? What will you do different next time? I know that's one of your favorite.
One of the things that happened this week related to your story is I had a leader of a faith based group, a new leader, wanted his own congregation, received his own congregation, and was looking forward to pastoring in this way. And he said to me, this is a lot of work. I said, what do you mean this is a lot of work? People call you all sorts of hours with all sorts of problems. They have all sorts of expectations. I really have to think about how I'm going to take all this on. And I just think that that really summarizes for me, like this conversation, today's topic. Like, yeah, you need to think about what you're getting yourself into, because you're talking about people's lives. And he's saying, these are serious issues they're bringing to me and expectations they have of me. And I'm not going to be able to do this during my convenient schedule, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's going to ask for something more of me, which anyone listening to this podcast understands that.
Taking stock of your energy, right? If you're going to take this thing on, what might you have to give up? And that is, I think, what a lot of us will take on. But you're a human being. And so you have to make choice. And how do you get to a place of discernment so that you can stay above the line as much as possible? We're not always going to be there. We are going to dip below. We're human. It's okay to dip below, but it's not okay to stay there.
Summarizing today's conversation, the problem, the presence can leak, to continue with our plumbing metaphor. So the leader's job is to address those leaks. Presence. Why it matters? It matters because whether you're doing the work above the line or below the line, it has a multiplier effect. You're either going to reduce the group's capacity to function or you're going to increase it. And it only takes one meeting, one statement, or one series of events to do that, to harm your group. And the third thing is that what we do is noticed. And what we do is noticed by others. It impacts others. And we can address some of these things by being aware ourselves of our physiology, of our breathing, of our bodies. How are we doing? Noticing these things, to really notice, how am I showing up and where is it coming from and how am I functioning? And the other thing that we touched on is really sharing the weight of all this with the group, knowing how to pull back, when to be vulnerable, when to ask for help, when to ask for feedback.
This episode's community engagement question is, where are you showing up above the line? And where might your presence be pulling the group below it?
So those are some of the concepts for today. As always, there are resources. Any resource that was mentioned during our dialogue will be posted in the link section of today's episode. And we're looking forward to continuing this dialogue and conversation together, Fred and I, and with all of you. So as always, until next time, be the calm in the chaos.